All right, let's jump right into this. If you were to pick up a newspaper today, the front page headline for America's oldest cold case wouldn't read, "Still lost." No way. It would say, "Case reopened." For centuries, the fate of the lost colony of Roanoke has been treated like this spooky, ghostly legend, right? You know the story: 115 people vanish into thin air in 1587, leaving behind absolutely nothing but the word Croatoan carved into a post. But today we are not looking at this as some dead historical footnote. We're treating this as an active, ongoing investigation. Thanks to massive breakthroughs in modern forensic genealogy, newly unsealed archives, and honestly, an incredibly dedicated network of online citizen historians, the entire narrative is flipping on its head. So in this explainer, we're going to dig into the absolute latest research to see how this 400-year-old mystery is finally being cracked wide open. So first things first, we kind of need to throw out all our old assumptions. If you spend any time scrolling through modern historical message boards or Reddit threads like r/unresolved mysteries, you'll see a radically different consensus taking shape. It's known as the note on the door theory. For hundreds of years, that carving, Croatoan, was treated as this deeply cryptic, almost mystical puzzle. But as modern researchers and local historians are quick to point out, the colonists knew exactly where Croatoan was. It's modern-day Hatteras Island. Keep in mind, these people have been waiting 3 years for their governor, John White, to return with supplies. So the current internet consensus? That carving wasn't a mystery at all. It was literally the 16th century equivalent of leaving a post-it note on the fridge saying, "Hey, we went over to the neighbor's house." They packed up and moved in with the friendly Native American tribe out of sheer necessity. Now, to really tackle this like a proper investigative journalist, we have to ground the mystery in physical reality. This isn't just a myth, it's a geographic crime scene. Take a look at this data from the North Carolina Historical Database. It pinpoints the exact GPS coordinates for these markers around Manteo in Dare County. You could literally get in your car today, plug in these coordinates, and drive right up to the Fort Raleigh National Historic Site. Treating this area as a tangible, mapped environment, a place you can actually walk around in, is exactly what has led modern researchers to discover new clues that have, remarkably, been hidden in plain sight for centuries. Which brings us to a really massive, front-page-worthy question. What if the colonists didn't just casually wander off into the woods? What if their disappearance was actually a pre-planned, highly coordinated evacuation? And more importantly, did Governor John White know exactly where they were going the entire time?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it completely rewrites the official story. This is Governor John White's original 16th century map of the region, famously known as the Virginia Pars map. For over 400 years, it just sat quietly in the British Museum. But recently, researchers decided to take a much closer look. Using modern X-ray analysis, they discovered a deliberate alteration. Hidden beneath a tiny, innocent-looking paper patch on the map, right at the junction of the Chowan River and Albemarle Sound, is a drawing of a four-pointed, star-shaped fort. I mean, wow. This points directly to a secretive, pre-planned strategy by Sir Walter Raleigh and John White to move the colony inland.
And any good historical investigation relies on one classic rule: follow the money. So we have two motives here. The public motive for moving inland was safety. Moving away from the coast makes total strategic sense if you're trying to dodge the looming, heavily armed Spanish armadas. But there's always a secret motive, right? And this one was driven by the economic imperatives of the English crown. Sir Walter Raleigh needed a serious return on his massive investment. They weren't just looking for a place to hide out. They were looking to set up a highly profitable enterprise. And that entire enterprise was built around one specific plant: sassafras. The area surrounding the Chowan River, right where that hidden star fort was drawn on the map, was absolutely covered in it. You really have to understand the context of the late 16th century here. Syphilis was just ravaging England and Europe. So sassafras was essentially the pharmaceutical gold of its day. It was widely believed to be the only effective cure for the disease. The sheer financial incentive of this medicinal crop gives us a massive, extremely practical economic motive for the colony's inland relocation. Okay, so if we accept that they had a secret map and a major financial motive to go inland, we need physical evidence, right? Enter the Dare Stones. Back in 1937, a traveler named Lewis Hammond stumbled upon this remarkable artifact, the very first Dare Stone, along the Chowan River near Edenton. Now pay attention to the geography here, because Edenton sits directly across the river from the exact coordinates of the hidden fort on John White's map, an area known today as the Scotch Hall Preserve. This stone, supposedly carved by Eleanor Dare, who was Governor White's daughter, records this absolutely heartbreaking story of misery, sickness, and attacks that claimed the lives of her husband and her young daughter, Virginia Dare. It's literally the ultimate tragic dispatch from the frontier. For decades, academics completely dismissed the Dare stones. They wrote them off as some elaborate 1930s Great Depression-era hoax. But incredibly, modern forensic geology has entirely flipped the script on this. Analysis of that first stone shows it's actually carved on local indigenous quartzite. And even more importantly, it features deep oxidation, basically rusting and a linear weathering profile right inside the carved grooves. In forensic terms, you simply cannot fake that kind of deep, centuries-long exposure to the elements. Combined with perfectly accurate Middle English spelling, the physical evidence strongly suggests that this specific stone, the starting point of a 48-stone breadcrumb trail, is absolutely genuine. And when you start connecting the dots through time, the momentum of this investigation just skyrockets. You have the establishment and sudden disappearance of the colony in the late 1500s. Then, there's a massive gap until 1937 when the Dare stone gives us the first physical inland breadcrumb. Jump all the way forward to 2009, and extensive earth-moving for a golf course at the Scotch Hall Preserve, which, again, is the exact site of the hidden map fort, sparked a renewed frenzy of archaeological interest. It's just wild to think that modern real estate development is literally unearthing layers of this historical cold case right beneath our feet. But here is where any sharp investigative journalist would spot a glaring contradiction. It's a huge geographic paradox. Think about it. If Eleanor Dare and a large faction of the colony migrated west along the Croatoan River to harvest sassafras, who in the world was left behind on the coast to carve Croatoan into that palisade post? To answer that, we have to look at recent archaeological excavations down on Hatteras Island, south of Roanoke. And researchers have found some incredible evidence of cultural blending there. It's beautifully summarized by this one concept: napped glass. Archaeologists found fragments of 16th century English window glass that had actually been chipped or napped using traditional Native American techniques to create arrowheads and tools. It's just a perfect physical metaphor for two completely different cultures fusing together out of pure survival and necessity. And honestly, the napped glass is just the tip of the iceberg. Forum sleuths and archaeologists are constantly pointing to a rapidly growing pile of evidence that supports this idea of coastal assimilation. Digs at the Croatoan village sites have turned up English glass trade beads and colonial copper rings, and even more striking, when later European explorers finally arrived in the area, local oral histories and written accounts clearly described members of the Hatteras tribe possessing distinct European features, like lighter hair and gray or blue eyes. The evidence is practically screaming at us that they didn't just slowly die out in the wilderness, they integrated. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when you pull all this modern evidence together. A grand synthesis emerges. It's called the split faction theory, mapping the Roanoke divergence. The colonists didn't just vanish into thin air. They made a highly calculated strategic split to ensure their survival. One faction, likely led by Eleanor Dare, took the inland route westward down the Croatoan River toward that planned sassafras fort, leaving those tragic Dare stones behind. Meanwhile, a second faction traveled southward to Hatteras Island, left the Croatoan note on the door, so to speak, and successfully assimilated with the friendly Native American tribe. Which leads us to our final, and honestly, perhaps most provocative question, a theory that's widely discussed on history subreddits right now, called the conspiracy of silence. If a big group of these colonists survived by assimilating with the Croatoan tribe, why on earth didn't the English loudly celebrate their survival? Well, you have to consider the politics of the time. For the English Empire, projecting absolute superiority was everything. Admitting that their proud civilized colonists had to completely abandon their English identities and happily go native just to survive, that would have been a massive political embarrassment. It would have completely undermined their imperial propaganda. So we really have to ask, did the crown intentionally brand them as lost, simply because a mysterious, tragic disappearance was much better for public relations than the truth of their assimilation? It's a fascinating thought to leave you with, that America's oldest mystery might not have been a tragedy of the wilderness at all, but a calculated cover-up by an empire desperately trying to save face.